Hey there, welcome back. I hope you've had a long day and that you're somewhere warm, maybe under a blanket, maybe listening to the rain or the hum of your room. If your mind's still busy, that's okay. You don't need to fix anything right now. Just breathe slowly and let everything outside this moment fade away. Because tonight, we're heading far north to a place older than maps, older than kings, where winter ruled the calendar, and thunder was a god's voice echoing through the trees. So close your eyes if you like. Let the world go quiet for a while. And together, let's travel back to the frozen forests of the old Baltic. Tonight, you travel somewhere most maps have forgotten a place, not quite north, not quite east, but suspended between forest and frost. If you listen closely, you can almost hear it. The slow crack of ice, the sigh of trees, and somewhere beyond the horizon, a low, distant thunder, not the kind that comes before a storm, but the kind that sounds like a sleeping god dreaming beneath the snow. Welcome to the old Baltic. Before names like Lithuania, Latvia, or Estonia meant anything, before cathedrals or calendars or kings, this land was a quilt of forests and rivers stitched together by silence. Here, people did not think of themselves as nations. You are a fisherman, a woodcutter, a keeper of bees, a dweller in a low wooden hut crouched against the wind. Your life is not measured by years, but by winters, each one longer than the last. For 7 months, snow buries the fields. The lakes freeze, the rivers stop breathing, and the sun that fickle guessed barely rises before sinking again. The nights stretch so long that even firelight seems tired. And in that deep cold, every human sound, the scrape of a pot, the whisper of a prayer, feels too small to reach the sky. But you believe the sky is listening. You believe it has a voice heavy, rumbling, alive. You call that voice Perkūnas. To outsiders, the later Christians who will march here with crosses and iron, Perkūnas will seem just another thunder god, a cousin of Thor, a rustic echo of Zeus. But to you, he is something far older and far closer. The spirit of summer itself, trapped beneath the ice, pounding against the frozen heavens to remind the living that warmth has not died, only fallen asleep. When thunder rolls across the winter sky, it is the heartbeat of the world struggling to wait. It is the sound of life insisting on returning. You live inside that sound. Your house is built from pine and spruce, your roof thatched with reeds and moss, your walls thick enough to remember warmth. At night, smoke from the hearth climbs through the hole in your ceiling, a soft gray column rising into the black. Every spark that follows it upward is a message, a plea to the sky to remember you. Here, you learn quickly that nature does not forgive forgetfulness. If you fail to honor the frost, it will break your roof. If you fail to thank the river, it will keep its fish. And if you fail to respect the thunder, it may never return. The cold is not your enemy, it is your teacher. And Perkūnas is the loudest lesson of all. You imagine him with a beard of flames and a hammer made of lightning. His chariot roars across the clouds, pulled by horses whose hooves spark fire when they strike the sky. But for all his might, Perkūnas is not distant or cruel. He is stern like a father who demands courage from his children. When thunder comes, you do not hide. You open your door, face the storm, and whisper thanks. Because thunder means warmth will return. It means the god has not forgotten the world. There is a story told in your village, a secret passed by firelight, when the wind howls loud enough to hide it, that thunder is not merely weather, but war. Somewhere above the clouds, Perkūnas hunts Velnias, the dark spirit of chaos and deceit. Velnias stole the fire of the earth, hiding it in the belly of mountains, binding summer in chains of ice. And so, each winter storm is the sound of Perkūnas chasing him, the clash of gods shaking heaven and earth. When lightning strikes a tree near your home, you and your neighbors gather around the smoldering trunk. You believe it has been touched by the god himself, purified by his fire. Sometimes, you carve that sacred wood into small charms, axes, hammers, bolts, and wear them around your neck on leather cords. Even today, archaeologists will find those relics buried beneath ancient farms. Bronze amulets shaped like thunderbolts, small enough to hide in a fist, heavy enough to carry a lifetime of faith. From the warmth of modern light, it is easy to smile at such beliefs. You can now flip a switch and chase darkness from a room. You once had to beg the heavens to do the same. But faith, like fire, begins small. And in this world of frost and fear, belief is not superstition. It is survival. To live through a Baltic winter, you need more than fur and food. You need something to hold when the nights refuse to end. Something to remind you that the world still has a heartbeat. So you keep your gods close, not in temples of stone, but in the corners of your home. Every house has a hearth, and every hearth has a soul. You call her Gabija, sister of Perkūnas, goddess of the household flame. When your family eats, you offer her crumbs of bread. When you sleep, you cover the fire with ashes gently, as if tucking in a child. If the fire goes out on its own, it is said that Gabija has turned her face away. And no one sleeps easily that night. By the glow of that fire, you remember the sound of thunder. It lives not only in the sky, but in the creak of your roof beams, in the crack of your axe, in the hiss of snow melting on a log. Perkūnas is not only a god of storms, he is the pulse behind every act of endurance. In your world, history is not written on parchment, it is whispered in smoke. The Baltic people do not keep records. They keep warmth. And warmth is everything. When the snow buries your door and wolves circle too close, you sing the old hymns. Not loudly, just enough to make the rafters tremble, enough for the gods to hear through the frost. Children learn the words before they learn their own names. Perkūne, griausmingas dievas. Perkūnas, mighty god of thunder. Each syllable feels like a spark in the dark, a small defiance against endless night. During the longest winters, when food runs thin and rivers turn to glass, you and your neighbors gather in the square at dusk. You light a great fire fed by every household's flame and call to the sky. The wind moans through the pines, and sometimes, just sometimes, thunder answers. To you, that is proof enough. The god is still awake. There is something deeply human in that, the idea that warmth needs a voice, that faith needs sound. It's why people still light candles in cathedrals, still strike matches on birthday cakes, still gather around glowing screens on dark nights. You have replaced Perkūnas with electricity, but you are still trying to summon the same thing: light, safety, the promise of morning. But back then, there is no morning yet, only the endless twilight of the north. The Baltic world lives in shades of gray between pagan and Christian, forest and sea, life and sleep. To the south, the Franks build stone churches. To the east, the Slavs carve icons. But here, at the frozen fringe of Europe, faith burns like a coal cupped in bare hands. It is small, it is fragile, and it survives. Centuries later, when the Teutonic Knights march through the snow with iron crosses and banners, they will find you still praying to thunder. They will write in disbelief. They worship fire and storm and call the sky a god. They will never understand that for you, nature is not something to conquer, it is something to converse with. You do not pray for dominion. You pray for mercy. And maybe that is why, even after cathedrals rise and the old gods fall silent, the thunder never loses its meaning. When storms roll over the Christian lands, the old women will still cross themselves and whisper, Perkūnas rides again. Faith does not vanish. It changes its name. So tonight, as you listen lying in bed, perhaps, hearing the soft hum of your heater or the rain against your window, imagine that sound stretched across 1,000 years. Imagine the same wind, the same cold, the same need to believe in something that burns brighter than frost. Because that is where your story begins. In a world of long nights and short hopes, where thunder is not a warning, but a reminder, where the gods are close enough to hear the crack of your door, the drop of your tear, the whisper of your prayer. A world where a storm is not an ending, but a promise. So settle in. Pull the blanket closer. Let the room grow quiet, the way the forest did before lightning struck. And remember once, long ago, before the world learned to forget, thunder was a prayer, and fire was faith. You wake before dawn, though dawn hardly means anything here. The light never fully returns. It only dilutes the darkness for a few hours, turns black into a soft gray, then sinks again. You pull on wool that still smells faintly of smoke and pine sap, open the door, and the cold walks in before you do. The forest stands silent ranks of pines, straight and black, rising like pillars in an abandoned temple. Snow presses against their trunks, and every branch droops under white weight. Your breath drifts out and hangs there, unwilling to move on. The air is so still it feels solid. If sound had a body, it would freeze here too. You step onto the path between the trees, the snow crunching in slow rhythm. Each step is a conversation with the ground. The frozen river nearby glints like dull glass. You can see cracks running through it. Trapped motion, the memory of a current that has forgotten how to flow. Somewhere beneath that surface are fish, patient as saints, waiting for the thaw that may never come. This is month 4 of the long sleep, though you've stopped counting. In this land, calendars are jokes told by people with sunlight. Here, you measure time by wood piles and smoke. If the logs shrink too fast, you know the world is running out of days. From the hill, you can see your village wooden cottages with steep roofs, all dusted in white. Each one exhales a thin column of smoke into the still air, gray ribbons rising and disappearing among the trees. The smoke is the only movement winter allows. It drifts where it pleases, like a spirit unbothered by gravity or permission. You head to the storehouse first, always the storehouse. It's the closest thing to a clock you trust. Inside, the air smells of salt and straw, fish and flax. You check the racks. The dried bream looks fine, though thinner than you remember. A row of honey jars gleams faintly in the half-light. You shake one, the honey has crystallized, but that's good. It means it hasn't spoiled. The barrels of grain are half full. You run a hand over the coarse wooden lid, tracing frost patterns like script. Winter writes its own language, and you've learned to read it. Outside, someone's splitting wood. Each strike rings out sharp and lonely. The sound travels far. It has nowhere else to go. You pause to listen not to the axe, but to what follows it. Silence, deep and approving. Even silence has texture here. It presses against your ears, thick as wool. The villagers move slowly, wrapped in layers of fur and patience. You pass old Arvidas, leading his thin horse to the well. The bucket rope creaks, ice snaps, and the sound echoes like breaking glass. He nods to you without words. Conversation wastes breath that freezes mid-sentence. Everyone saves warmth as if it were gold. You remember when you first came to this place, or perhaps when the place first came to you. The difference blurs after enough winters. At first, the cold felt like an intruder, an unwanted guest slipping under the door. But somewhere between the second and third month, it became part of the household. Now you expect it. You leave a chair for it by the fire, the way your grandparents once left bread for wandering spirits. Every day repeats the same pattern. Wake, feed the fire, mend the tools, check the traps, sweep the hearth, thank the gods. You no longer separate work from ritual. In a land where daylight is rationed, everything you do becomes sacred by necessity. The traps yield little a hair if you're lucky, a branch that looks like one if you're not. The forest has grown quiet. Even predators seem to have given up ambition. You've seen fox prints freeze before they reached the tree line, as if the animal changed its mind mid-step. Still, you lay the snares again. Hope is a habit you can't afford to break. By midday, if midday can be said to exist, you return home. The door protests as you push it open, swollen with frost. Inside, the fire has sunk into coals, breathing softly like a sleeping child. You crouch, feed it a handful of peat, and whisper a word of thanks. The flame stirs, stretching thin fingers of orange into the gloom. Your hands tingle as blood remembers movement. For a moment, it almost feels like summer, but only in miniature, a private illusion kept alive in the hearth's small heart. You eat from a wooden bowl, smoked fish, a piece of rye bread, maybe a pickled onion if fortune smiles. The taste is simple, clean, and repetitive. You've learned that hunger doesn't shout anymore. It murmurs politely, the way an old friend does when visiting uninvited. There's humor in this life, though you find it frozen around the edges. You laugh at the absurdity of counting seasons when every day looks the same. You've started naming icicles that hang from the eaves long, thin ghosts who refuse to leave. The one near the window you called Jonas, after the man who promised spring would come early 3 years in a row. Jonas the icicle has lasted longer than Jonas the man. You smile at that. Dark humor is still humor. Laughter makes a decent kindling. Sometimes the sky tries to change color just to keep you interested. Pale blue in the morning, lead gray by afternoon, violet at the edge of night. But mostly it stays white, a blank page stretched across heaven. If you stare too long, you start seeing shapes, wolves, gods, faces of those who didn't make it to this winter. You stop staring, In the evenings, the village gathers smoke by smoke. Through the trees, you can see orange windows flicker, little stars stitched into the fabric of dark. From one house drifts a song not joyful, not sad, something between breathing and remembering. It's the sound of people refusing to vanish. When the wind rises, it brings news from nowhere. The pine trees groan like ships lost at sea. Snow lifts in small spirals, dances briefly, then falls back with a sigh. You watch it, half hypnotized. Even motion seems exhausted here. Inside, the hearth crackles. You sit close, hands extended, eyes reflecting flame. The wood hisses, spits sap, tells its own short story of a summer long forgotten. You listen because there's not much else to listen to. The sound fills the room the way memory fills silence. You think about how time behaves differently in the cold. In summer, it rushes like a river. In winter, it thickens like honey. You can feel it pooling in the corners of the house. Some days, you swear you could scoop it up with a spoon. You've learned to stop waiting for change. That's the trick of endurance. Stop expecting rescue, and the world stops feeling cruel. You don't ask when the thaw will come anymore. You just sharpen your knife and check the roof beams. Winter is not the villain you thought it was. It's the landlord. And you, somehow, keep paying rent. Outside, the moon climbs over the forest, swollen and yellow, like a lantern hung too low. The snow glows faintly under it, every grain reflecting a separate lifetime of light. You step out for air. Your breath curls upward, joins the ghosts of everyone who ever did the same. The village sleeps, but you stand still, listening. The silence feels alive. There's a pulse in it, slow, deep, patient. And you realize something. The world is not dead. It's just thinking very slowly. Tomorrow will look the same, and the day after that. But that's fine. Here, sameness is safety. Change is the dangerous stranger who knocks after dark. You go back inside, bank the fire, and lie down beneath furs that smell of smoke and wool and years. The wind hums through the gaps in the wall, a tired, familiar song. Your eyelids grow heavy. The house creaks once, softly like an old friend saying goodnight. Outside, winter breathes. It will keep breathing for months yet. But for now, it leaves you in peace, a small mercy, offered by a vast, indifferent god of cold. Sleep comes slow, but it comes. And in the distance, far beyond the frozen forest, something stirs, a sound faint as memory, low as heartbeat. It might be thunder, or maybe it's just the world, reminding you it's still alive. By the time the sun remembers to climb over the tree line again, you have already been awake for hours. The mornings don't announce themselves anymore. They simply appear, pale and uncertain, like a ghost knocking politely on your window. You stir the ashes in the hearth. They whisper instead of crackle. The fire burns slow these days, not out of laziness but calculation, like a miser counting coins. Every log you feed it is a negotiation. Warmth now or warmth later. The cold is patient. It waits. It eats nothing of its own, so it eats everything of yours. You step outside to fetch wood, and the world greets you with that old familiar bite, the kind that steals the breath straight from your mouth and makes your teeth ache as if each one remembers the heat of some forgotten summer. The path to the woodshed is carved through knee-deep snow. The edges are hard, almost architectural. You could trace them with a chisel. Your boots creak. The sound is satisfying in the way breaking something beautiful can be. Inside the shed, the air tastes of resin and dust. You stack logs under your arm, pine, birch, a little alder if you're lucky. You think about how each piece was a tree once, full of wind and birds, now just currency for survival. You talk to them sometimes. Everyone does. Sorry, you mutter to the woodpile. Nothing personal. Back in the house, the warmth feels almost obscene. The air moves again. The fire stretches, yawns, decides to forgive you for letting it starve. You hang your coat near the door, and the frost clinging to it sighs as it dies. For a moment, it almost sounds human. Breakfast is not a feast, it's a compromise. A thin slice of rye, hard enough to sharpen a knife. A scrap of dried fish that tastes mostly of smoke and memory. You chew slowly, because haste feels disrespectful. Food is not eaten here, it's survived. The hunger of cold is different from the hunger of emptiness. It doesn't live in your stomach. It lives in the air, in the walls, in the way your breath fogs and vanishes before you can claim it. You can fill your belly and still starve for warmth. That's why you plan every fire like a military campaign. You learn the science of smoke, too much peat, and the house smells like a swamp. Too little and frost creeps across the floorboards like spilled milk. You learn to sit close enough to feel the heat, but not so close the gods think you're greedy. In the evenings, you smoke fish over a pit lined with stones. The scent of herring and alder drifts through the village, thin and stubborn against the cold. The smoke clings to your clothes until you and the fish smell like cousins. But that's the smell of survival, and no one complains. You check the flax that hangs in bundles by the rafters. It dries slowly, whispering in the drafts like old women gossiping. The threads will become linen, the linen will become shirts, and the shirts will become stories told about the one winter that didn't win. Somewhere nearby, a neighbor's child coughs. The sound carries through the stillness like a dropped spoon. Coughs are expensive this time of year. You pause. Listen 1, 2, 3, then exhale. The silence that follows is worth more than gold. The old men in the village like to say that the cold has an appetite for everything that moves. It chews on fences, gnaws roofs, licks the life from your fingers one layer at a time. You believe them. You've seen nails pop from beams like teeth loosening in a dying jaw. So you fight back the only way you can, by building small warmths inside the big cold. A cup of broth, a shared joke, someone carving wood by lamplight, muttering that the frost can't carve as finely. There's humor in the absurdity of it all. You once spent half an hour defrosting a spoon with your breath just to eat porridge that had already frozen solid again. You laughed so hard you nearly dropped the bowl, and that laughter felt better than the food. You've begun naming things, because names make them stay longer. The kettle is mother. The woodpile is army. The draft under the door is snake. When you curse them, it sounds like conversation. When you bless them, it sounds like prayer. Sometimes, you wonder if the gods get lonely too. Perkūnas with his hammer in the clouds, Gabiha curled in her hearth, both trapped in their own elements. You imagine them watching you the way you watch the fire quietly, helplessly, hoping it doesn't go out. You spend most of your day bargaining with time. A stick of wood buys 15 minutes of comfort. A meal buys 4 hours of strength. A nap costs you daylight you'll never get back. Outside, the snow squeaks underfoot, a small, sharp sound, like a mouse being stepped on by eternity. You visit the traps again. They hang empty, their thin wires glinting in the dim light. The forest gives nothing for free. Still, you reset them. The act of hoping is the only luxury you can still afford. You pause by the river. It's a mirror of dull silver, sealed and perfect. Beneath it, the current mutters to itself. You kneel, brush away the snow, and tap the ice with your knuckle. It answers with a hollow, metallic note, the heartbeat of a world asleep. Once, in a moment of boredom or bravery, you pressed your ear against it. You heard the strangest music, a chorus of bubbles, cracks, faraway creaks like whales trapped in glass. You told no one. Some things lose their power when spoken aloud. As afternoon fades, you make rounds of the village. A widow's roof has caved. You help patch it with pine branches. She thanks you with a bowl of broth so thin it might be water pretending to be food. You drink it anyway. The heat is the only thing that matters. Children play outside, throwing snow at nothing in particular. Their laughter sounds like chimes, fragile, high, and quickly swallowed by the wind. They are too young to understand that winter isn't a season, it's a temperament. You pass the blacksmith's hut. The forge has been cold for weeks. Metal doesn't bend here, it breaks. The smith sits by the door, carving wooden nails out of boredom and irony. Cheaper than iron, he says, grinning with no teeth. You nod. It's true. As dusk drifts in, not falling, just thickening, the village gathers small flames like stars. From a distance, it looks like the earth remembering how to glow. You walk home, the snow crunching under your boots, the sky a sheet of iron. Inside, you strip off your coat, hang it by the fire, and watch droplets melt and fall from its hem. Each one sizzles, hisses, and dies tiny sacrifices to Gabiha. You murmur a thanks to the goddess. You've learned never to assume warmth is yours by right. Dinner is simpler than breakfast, which was simpler than lunch. A little porridge, reheated thrice, tasting faintly of yesterday's smoke. You find it almost comforting. There's honesty in monotony. When you eat, you count your breaths, not for meditation, for proof. You are still here. So is the cold. It's a stalemate you've both learned to respect. After the meal, you sit by the window, looking out at the endless white. Somewhere in the forest, a wolf howls long, low, and oddly conversational. You imagine it asking the same question everyone asks: how much longer? The wind doesn't answer. It rarely does. You think about the stories your grandmother told about winters so fierce people claim they saw spirits walking across the river, using the frozen surface as a bridge between worlds. You believe her now. The air feels thin enough to separate dimensions. A soft knock startles you. It's your neighbor, Tomas, holding a small jar. Fermented turnip, he says proudly. Still good. You accept it like an offering. Still alive, you answer. And that's the joke, the blessing, and the truth all at once. He laughs a dry, brittle laugh and leaves. In this weather, every visit is a pilgrimage. Later, When the fire settles into its slow orange heartbeat, you lie down on the bench beside it. The ceiling above is lined with frost, glittering faintly in the firelight like constellations pretending to be architecture. You think about how everything freezes here except faith. Faith keeps moving small, invisible, but stubborn. Your eyelids drift. The cold hums its lullaby outside, a tune older than language. You smile half asleep, because even in all this stillness, you can hear the faintest murmur like the river beneath the ice, or perhaps thunder too distant to believe in. And for a moment, you allow yourself to think that maybe, just maybe, the god of summer is still listening. You learn the winter by ear first. Before you see the crack in the eaves or the new drift swallowing the path, you hear the change long in advance. This season speaks, but not in sentences. It prefers single notes, held for a long time until you feel them instead of merely hearing them. The day begins with the wooden sigh of the doorframe easing itself awake. Old wood knows the cold intimately. It has learned to stretch and shrink without complaint, the way a faithful servant learns to anticipate a master's moods. The door sighs. The rafters answer with a soft click. The table legs, frost-bloated, give a courteous creak as if bowing to the morning. You nod back, because it would be rude not to. Out in the yard, the snow makes that bright, dry squeak under your boots, a sound as delicate as crushed glass, and as final as a verdict. The squeak is a gauge. If it's high and tight, the day will be hard and clear. If it's low and soft, a storm is preparing its throat. You didn't invent that rule. The snow told you. By the river, a reed bed hums when the wind passes at just the right angle. It's not music, not really, but it has rhythm. A breath in, a breath out. A thin drone that flattens your thoughts until they lie quiet on the ice like sleeping birds. Every few heartbeats, a reed stutters and the tone shifts, and you find yourself turning to see who spoke. No one did. Winter is full of voices that belong to no one. The trees keep their own orchestra. When the temperature drops suddenly, the trunks answer with a sharp crack, like a whip striking the far end of the forest. Sometimes it is close enough to make you flinch. Sometimes it is so far away you confuse it with memory. Your grandmother used to say that was Perkūnas rehearsing, loosening his shoulder, practicing the throw of the hammer so he wouldn't miss when the season turned. You smile at the thought because it makes the noise less lonely. The roof has a vocabulary too. A single thud. Snow slipping and settling one hand's breadth lower. A scattered patter. Frost giving way to a short-lived melt. Then regretting its decision and returning to duty. A long groan. A warning to fetch the ladder before the rafters decide to remember their age. You can tell, almost without thinking, which sound means work, which means patience, and which means prayer. In the middle of the day, if you can call it that, the forest hush drops to its deepest register. No birds, no insects. Even the wolf paths stay unwritten. This is the hour when the cold writes its rules across the land. Everything living considers those rules and decides to obey. A dog howls at the edge of the village. It's not a panicked sound, more like a question stretched into a long ribbon. Who's out there? From very far away, the answer floats back, not a dog, but the echo of your own dog traveling across frozen river and hanging in the thin air like a ghost with good lungs. For all you know, The whole north is one dog calling to itself from 1,000 mouths. You carry water home. The bucket's iron handle smacks the wood in a steady metronome against your palm. Clack, 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 your day's heartbeat in miniature. From the house, a kettle lifts its tiny voice, a domestic note that means salvation. It's an old comfort that water sings before it boils. In winter, the song feels almost moral. You could swear the kettle is proud of its little miracle. Not every sound is a kindness. Sometimes the wind threads itself through the gaps in the shutters and plays a thin, mean flute. You stuff moss into the seam and the flute grows hoarse, then silent, like a lyre caught mid-story. Sometimes the snow hisses off the roof in a fine powder, and the sound is so much like a whisper that you turn, guilty, convinced someone knows your thoughts. Sometimes the ice on the river booms, deep and hollow, a monk striking a bell beneath the earth. That sound reaches into your chest and taps your ribs as if checking whether you are as hollow and resonant as the river is. The old people call these things omens, but not in the way city folk think of omens, nothing theatrical, no thunderclap perfectly timed with a prophecy. An omen here is a nudge, a piece of advice in sound. A crack far to the west. Fell your wood from the eastern edge today. Reeds humming low. Don't trust the ice near the mouth of the stream. Dogs howl broken midway. The weather will change after nightfall. Boom from the river. Light the lamps early. Share a story. Stay home. Some are gentler. You wake at night and hear frost forming on the inside of the window, a faint sandpaper hush that means your breath has quilted the glass and the cold is sewing the last hem. That sound, to you, whispers, go back to sleep. The world is working without you for a while. It is impossible not to slide, occasionally, into superstition. When a log splits perfectly with one swing, you take it as a good omen. When you drop the axe and it lands blade up, you freeze, then touch the haft 3 times and turn it harmless side down, because your aunt said that offends the winter. You don't believe in it, not really. You just respect how loud a quiet season can be. Your neighbor Tomas has a catalog of omens he delivers, like a priest blessing everyone with a dry laugh. If you sneeze before dawn, he says, solemn as a raven, expect a visitor before dusk. You sneezed before dawn yesterday. No one visited. Tomas shrugged. The visitor was hunger. It arrived at noon. He is infuriatingly correct. There is, too, the music of work human sounds stitched into the cold's invisible score. The rhythm of flax beating in the barn, thud-thud, shake, thud-thud, shake steady enough to make time hold still. The whir of a spindle as thread gathers on it, a domestic mosquito that somehow comforts instead of annoys. The pop of a sap bubble in the fire that startles a curse out of your mouth and a laugh out of someone else's. You've never loved noise so much. It means the house has a pulse. You think often of those who didn't learn the music quickly enough. A newcomer once ignored the willow's warning the way its branches ticked the ice like fingernails and took a sled onto the river's first skin. The crack was soft. Not a warning, but a decision. He survived. Everyone said so, but he moved away in spring and never sent word. Some mistakes keep humming long after the song ends. At twilight, the village becomes a choir of hinges and latches as doors close in sequence. One creak, 3 more. A pause. a far-off clack. It's the old rhythm of safety. Close, secure, check, listen. There's no conductor, but somehow it always ends together with the quiet click of the last bar. Night has its own composer. The snowpack settles audibly when the temperature drops, a muffled sigh across the roofs like 100 tired people lying down at once. From the forest, a limb falls with a hollow drumbeat, boredom's percussion. A fox pads along the fence and stops, sniffing. You can't hear it, but the chickens can. They shuffle, and the straw whispers of their fear. There is a generosity in darkness. It lets you hear what fear sounds like before you feel it. Sometimes your mind plays tricks. You will swear you hear footsteps on the path, deliberate and slow, and you will open the door to find nothing but your own impatience walking back and forth. You will think someone is at the window, and it will be the moon shifting behind a thin cloud, the light dragging an oval across the floorboards like a pale mask. You will hear your name, and it will be the kettle finishing its phrase. On the few nights when clouds lift and the sky opens like a vault, the cold changes key higher, sharper, all crystal and no velvet. The stars crackle, they don't, but you could swear they do. The snow shines with an arrogance that borders on holy. The aurora shows itself briefly, a silent river of green fire flowing over a frozen sea. You stand there, and your ears go numb, and you think, if the gods wanted to speak aloud, this is the grammar they would choose. From time to time, the village tries to answer back. Someone brings out an old drum and taps a heartbeat, while others hum, low and steady, the notes climbing together like warmth. You clap along without thinking, and the sound is thin in the air, but it stitches a seam between houses, between people. Not défiance conversation. Even the cold seems to listen. And then there is the boom that stops everything, the one from deep inside the lake, the one that makes spoons and drawers click, and the dog lift its head and stare at the door as if a guest has reached the step. That boom, the elders say, is winter turning over in its sleep. No need to fear it. Fear the silence that follows it, without end. Your humor grows drier as the season lengthens. You joke that the wind is an honest critic. It always finds the draft you denied was there. You say the house complains more than the people, and someone replies that the house has better reasons. You declare the woodpile a choir, the kettle a diva, the doorframe a philosopher. The cold, so humorless, becomes funny by contrast. Laughter is a small fire with no smoke. You tend it carefully. Some nights, when everyone has fallen asleep and the last coal keeps its red thought in the hearth, you lie awake and listen for the one sound that doesn't belong to this season. You aren't sure what you expect, a note warmer, perhaps, something rounder than wind and older than ice. You listen until your ears hum and your bones answer back. That is when the crack arrives, not tree, not roof, not river. It is far away, maybe beyond the forest, maybe above it. It rolls low, a rumble too slow for ice and too patient for wood. You sit up, and the house listens with you. The sound arrives again, closer, a long growl that seems to travel not through the air but through the idea of air, the way a memory travels through a face. You don't say the word yet. You don't want to frighten it away. The wind leans on the wall, and the reeds whisper in the dark like a congregation who knows the hymn but not the language. The dog lifts its head, ears forward, then settles, convinced the world remains predictable. You hold still, a hand on the warm brick at the side of the hearth. And there it is once more, rounded at the edges, distant but deliberate. Not a boom, not a crack, not a groan from anything that freezes. Something else. Something that remembers heat. You close your eyes and let the sound pass through you like a slow bell rung for the living. It fades over the pines and across the river and into the long corridors of snow, leaving a shape behind in the air where it used to be. You allow yourself a smile. The winter's orchestra has thousands of instruments, but only one conductor who comes from another season. You still don't say the word, but the word is there, waiting at the edge of your tongue, bright as iron and warm as old stories. When you finally lay down again, the house settles in sympathy, boards easing, rafters content, kettle breathing its last little sigh. You pull the blanket to your chin and the silence returns, not empty now, but expectant, like a stage before the curtain lifts. Outside, the forest listens too. You begin to understand that endurance is not a thing you carry. It is a room you live in. It has four walls: habit, humor, help, and hope, and a roof made of stories. You keep the door open for anyone who needs to step inside. And most days you are the one crossing someone else's threshold, hat in hand, breath like smoke before your face. Morning comes without hurry. You rise and the house greets you with its small chorus. The hearth's low murmur, the cupboard's sleepy hinge, the soft skitter of frost loosening its grip on the window. You answer with your own sounds, the scrape of a stool, the thud of kindling, the long, grateful exhale when the flames take. You are not alone here. Endurance spreads itself between people the way fire spreads between coals touch, and there it is, shared. The village understands this law as intimately as hunger. Tomas brings you a strip of smoked eel with the solemnity of a priest carrying a relic. You pass him a length of thread spun from last year's flax, fine as spider silk. Neither of you says, "I owe you." The phrase is too small. You say, "May your roof be obedient," and he answers, "May your fire remember you." These are contracts older than parchment. At noon, you take your tools and join two neighbors repairing a fence that lost its patience with the wind. You work in a silence that isn't empty, a planked, reassuring quiet where each thump of the mallet says, "We are here, we are here, we are here." Between blows, Tomas practices his litany of practical theology. If the gate creaks, oil it. If the roof cries, feed it. If the cow has opinions, agree with her. You call it wisdom. He calls it marriage. Back home, you sharpen the knife and sit with a block of birch in your lap. Endurance likes a task small enough to finish in one sitting. You let the blade decide what lives inside the wood, a tiny horse at first, then a bird whose wing remembers wind, then a lightning bolt charm with a hole for a cord. You run your thumb along the notch, and the shape becomes a thought you can hold. You think of Perkūnas, and it warms you in the way memory does. Not the whole summer, just one sunlit field cupped in the palm of your mind. In the corner, the kettle begins its slow monologue, first a whisper, then a shy whistle, then, at last, the clear little call that means tea. You pour carefully, because tea is not a drink here. It is an argument with winter that you intend to win. Steam climbs your face. You close your eyes and let it soften the space behind them. Later, the children arrive, trailing snow and questions. Why is the wind so good at squeezing? Do wolves get lonely? Does thunder speak our language? You are qualified to answer only one of these, but you take all three. Because wind has a teacher called river. Wolves are lonely, the way kings are lonely. And the last you save for later, because the answer is a story, and stories are a night meal. The mothers show at the door with mittens to dry and gossip to warm. You trade news like spices, a pinch of uncertainty about a merchant rumored to be stuck 2 valleys away, a handful of speculation about why the owl has begun calling at noon, a careful measure of praise for the family whose smoke rose earliest this week. In the background, the hearth glows like a slow heart. Someone wipes a child's nose with the hem of a sleeve. Someone else tucks another log against the flames with a tenderness that would embarrass them if it were witnessed by anyone but the gods. By afternoon, the light thins to a kind of thinking. You step out to check the sky, and the white world stares back with its patient blankness. If worry tries to climb your throat, you send it to split kindling. If fear asks for a seat at your table, you pour it a cup of hot water and call it caution. Endurance prefers you polite to your enemies. Panic only grows rude when hosted poorly. Work returns, and you welcome it like a fool welcomes advice. Grudgingly, then gratefully. You mend a strap with bone needle and steady fingers. You patch the sled runner with a sliver of ash and a prayer to the god of tasks too small to brag about. You find pleasure in accuracy, in the fussy correctness of knots, in the shameless affection you feel for a tool that behaves like an old friend. When the day withers, the village gathers not in a hall, but along a path of open doors. Each threshold offers a little scene, a table, a banked fire, the bowed heads of those who know the price of light. You step from room to room, as if moving through chapters, and the book is always the same but never boring. On one page, a grandmother demonstrates how to bind birch bark against a draft. On the next, a boy discovers that a spoon can also be an instrument if you have rhythm and forgiving neighbors. You linger where the stories smell best. Storytelling, you remind yourself, is not decoration here. It is the architecture of surviving. A tale gives a night a roof. A myth furnishes the corners where fear would otherwise sleep. A legend installs a window with a view of some other time and lets the mind borrow sunlight. So you begin. You asked if thunder speaks our language, you say, and 9 eyes lift and then soften, and 3 pairs of hands find warm laps to rest in, and someone adds a stick to the fire because stories require flame the way bread requires air. In the old days, you say, thunder didn't only speak our language, it taught it. Ah, you trace the curve of the lightning charm you carved earlier and hold it up so the light can find it. Perkūnas taught the mouth to make promises and keep them. He taught the hand to strike only when the blow would save someone. He taught the sky to keep a secret as long as it could, and then say it loudly and cleanly so everyone knew what the truth sounded like. The children lean in. The mothers listen without moving. You continue, voice low, pace unhurried the storyteller's gait. He chased the dark thing that stole the earth's fire, not because he loved fighting, but because he loved mornings. He loved roofs that didn't leak and kettles that remembered how to sing. He loved the sound of people laughing and the taste of rye baked when the air was still curious. You glance at the window at the heavy frost arabesques sketched there by a patient hand no one has seen. And when winter overstayed its welcome, he tapped the doors of the world not to break them, but to remind the hinges they could move. Someone smiles. Someone else breathes in sharply, almost invisibly, and you realize they were holding it, as people do when they forget they are allowed to breathe where they live. You do not finish the story, not yet. You let it hang from the beam like a lantern, burning slowly, throwing a circle of brightness the exact size of the room. The children begin to drowse. Their heads find shoulders. Their shoulders find blankets. The wind outside finds the old crack in the wall and hums a note that has accompanied more families than you'll ever meet. Later, the visitors drift away along the trampled snow, leaving thin constellations of footsteps that will survive until morning. You stand in the doorway, the heat of the house at your back, the cold's large hand pressing your face with that admirable frankness you have come to respect. The sky is ordinary, a pewter bowl turned over the world, but something in the air holds its breath. You bank the fire and sit for a while, without purpose. This too is a practice, allowing yourself to be unuseful in the presence of warmth. You polish the small lightning charm with the corner of your sleeve until it glints like a remembered noon. You tie it on a leather thong and hang it near the door. It is not a ward against danger. It is a reminder of what the door is for. Sleep arrives sidelong. You lie down on the bench with your back to the hearth and your knees drawn up the way a question draws itself around what it really wants to know. The house answers you with the usual reassurances, a crack here, a sigh there, a mouse somewhere conducting its illicit errands. Your thoughts try on different shapes: a fence, a river, a face you miss, a god you almost remember. Then the sound returns. Not the crack of a tree yielding, not the deep drum of ice changing its mind. A low, slow roll that gathers itself from far beyond the forest and glides over the roofs with the weight of something ancient and awake. It is not loud. Loudness would be an insult to the hour. It arrives like a decision made by weather and kept by sky. You keep still, because movement feels like disbelief, and disbelief is a cold you can't afford. The rumble deepens, then relaxes, as if a vast chest has exhaled. On the table, a spoon shivers once, embarrassed to be so easily impressed. On the rafters, a line of frost loosens and falls like a blessing. Under your palm, the bench seems to buzz with some private joy you hadn't granted it permission to feel. You whisper, very softly, so as not to make a ceremony of it. Perkūnas. The name doesn't summon the sound. The sound has its own business. But the syllables warm your mouth. You can taste iron and rain and the generous brown of soil that hasn't seen daylight in months. You do not rise. You do not wake the house or the neighbors. You let the moment pass through you the way river water passes a stone briefly, wholly, without argument. Outside, the wind shifts and the reeds answer with a lower note, as if they have been given a pitch to center themselves upon. The dog twitches in its sleep and then grows very content. Somewhere under the snow, a seed hears something it understands and decides to remember it. When the quiet returns, it is not the old quiet. It has a shape now, as if someone touched its surface and left a print. You smile into the dark. Tomorrow will still be winter. The woodpile will still require arithmetic. The pot will still negotiate. The door will still offer its morning sigh. But endurance feels different when a far room in the sky lights a candle for you. You move through your little house, and everything you touch seems to glow faintly. as if it has been named again. You check the banked hearth and, on impulse, whisper a separate thank you to the small goddess of this room. Stay, you tell Gabija, not as a command, but as an invitation. The coal answers with a redder breath. You think of how many rooms like this have whispered to their fires through winters that wanted to last forever. You believe in statistics when they are counted in survivors. Before sleep pulls you under, you tie one more knot around the day. You place the lightning charm where the last beam of the embers can find it. A fraction of brightness holds, patient and precise. Thunder was a prayer once, and fire was faith. Tonight you discover the third truth. Endurance is worship the daily, unshowy kind that makes a world survivable until the world remembers how to be kind. Your eyes close. The house performs its small lullaby. And far away, where clouds have their own village and the gods keep their own hours, something turns again, not to end the winter, not yet, but to remind it there are other seasons with speaking parts. You wake to a silence that feels thinner than usual, as if the air itself has been listening all night and is finally ready to reply. The light is strange, not brighter, not darker, just expectant. The frost on the window glows faintly blue, each crystal trembling as though holding its breath. Then you hear it again. A sound that doesn't belong to this world of stillness, round, patient, deep. It doesn't crack like ice or creak like wood. It rolls. It has weight, rhythm, and memory. It moves through the bones of the house and into you, gentle as a reminder and vast as a promise. Thunder. For a heartbeat, you think you've imagined it, that your dreams have mistaken longing for sound. But then it comes again, softer this time, as if testing whether you're awake. You are. The dog lifts its head. The rafters hum once, approvingly. Outside, the forest exhales a century's worth of cold. You rise and open the door. The air meets you like a slow-moving wave, not warm, not yet, but loosened somehow. The snow no longer shines like glass. It has dulled to the texture of sleep. Far to the east, a streak of cloud folds in on itself like a gray eyelid blinking open. And from somewhere deep under the frozen lake, or maybe the frozen sky, the god stirs again. The villagers call it Perkūnas' awakening. They say it happens when the imprisoned summer claws its way toward the surface, crying for release. Each rumble is a heartbeat, each tremor a reminder that light has not died, only been buried. You can almost hear the old songs whispering through the wind. Perkūne, Perkūne, girdėk mus. Perkūnas, Perkūnas, hear us. It has been 7 months since you heard that name aloud. 7 months of polite silence between you and the sky. Now it breaks that silence first, and you answer with gratitude disguised as disbelief. By mid-morning, word spreads like fire that refuses to wait for wood. The first thunder has come, and in the Baltic world, that means only one thing. It's time to prepare the welcome. You watch as the village begins to move with an energy it hasn't remembered in months. Doors open. Smoke thickens. Voices, rusty from disuse, start tuning themselves to song. It isn't quite celebration. It's more like negotiation, a conversation with something too vast to be seen. Everyone knows the rules. Thunder must be greeted, not ignored. Elders gather near the communal hearth at the village center, a stone ring blackened by decades of prayer and beer. They wear layers of wool and ritual necklaces of bone and brass, belts carved with symbols that look like the alphabet of fire. Their faces are creased like bark, but their eyes shine as if they've swallowed sparks. They begin with incense handfuls of crushed juniper and resin thrown into the flames. The smoke climbs lazily, twisting into the air, seeking its god with the patience of a prayer that knows where it's going. Someone adds dried herbs. The scent changes from sharp pine to sweet honey, from winter to something you almost remember but can't name yet. You bring a jar of Matus Alus honey beer brewed in the early autumn when the bees were still fat and drunk with work. The lid creaks open with ceremony. You pour a thin stream into a wooden cup, then into the fire itself. The flames flare up, golden, like laughter caught off guard. A hiss follows the sound of offering accepted. Around you, the villagers murmur blessings, half in prayer, half in hope. No one leads them. The words are older than any living voice. You join, even though you don't know whether you're speaking to Perkūnas, or to summer, or just to the version of yourself that still believes the world listens back. Children appear, carrying bits of charcoal from the hearth. They kneel by door frames and scratch zigzag lines into the wood lightning marks to ward off wandering spirits. Their hands move with solemn precision, though their faces are flushed with the thrill of allowed mischief. The youngest draws his bolt backwards by mistake. His sister smacks him gently and corrects it. The gods, after all, read direction. The elders smile at that. Even the gods must enjoy a good sibling argument. Later, the women prepare fire cakes, small rounds of dough baked directly on hot stones, brushed with honey and ash. They are meant for the thunder god, but somehow fewer and fewer reach the fire each year. You take one, break it in half, and pretend to feed the smoke its share before quietly finishing both pieces yourself. Perkūnas, you suspect, has no interest in carbohydrates. The air grows thick with fragrance, smoke, resin, yeast, and hope. It's not warm, but it's no longer sterile. It feels alive, as though the cold itself is pausing to listen. Someone brings out the drum. It's an old skin stretched across a frame blackened by years of ceremonies. When struck, it doesn't boom, it breathes. Each beat feels like it comes from the earth's chest, deep and patient. The rhythm is simple, but the heart understands it immediately. You find your foot tapping in time, your hands echoing softly against your coat. The villagers begin to hum. The hum becomes a melody. The melody becomes a language, and the language becomes a call. There are no lyrics now, just sound shaped by faith. A sound that says, "We remember you. Come back when you can." The children join in, their voices high and unpracticed, carrying a kind of courage that adults forget how to sing with. It's imperfect, but it's honest, and that's what the gods like best. The old man who tends the fire begins to speak between verses, his voice cracked but steady. "Do you know why thunder lives beneath the ice?" He asks no one in particular. You lean in, though you've heard this story every year. When the world was young, he says, winter grew greedy. It wanted everything light, warmth, laughter. So it built walls of frost and buried the summer alive. But the gods could not die, only sleep. And in the deepest darkness, Perkūnas turned his breath into thunder. Each roar cracked the prison a little more. Each strike of lightning was a hammer against the ice. He pauses, throws a pinch of salt into the flames. They leap blue, then settle again. Someday, he says softly, the sound will grow so strong that the ice will forget how to hold him. And when that happens, the rivers will run backward to meet the sea, and the trees will leaf in a single night. A child gasps. You smile not because you believe it will happen, but because it's beautiful to believe. The elder nods toward you. Until then, he says, we keep the fire burning. We keep the songs loud enough that he can hear them through the snow. By afternoon, the sky changes its expression. Clouds gather slowly, not in anger but in thought. They are dark, yes, but rich like soil waiting for rain. You can feel the charge building, a hum beneath the air. It crawls up your arms, into your teeth, makes the hair on your neck rise like grass in a breeze. Then the light shifts silver on the snow, bronze on the smoke, gold on the faces turned skyward. A hush spreads, thick as velvet. And then the third rumble. This one is different. Not a memory this time, a declaration. It rolls through the forest, bends the trees without breaking them, shakes the icicles from their moorings so they fall like glass tears. The people cheer, softly but fiercely. Hands rise, not in fear but in greeting. The god has answered. A woman lifts her child and whispers in his ear, listen, little one, that's the sound of summer knocking. The boy laughs, a bright, fragile thing that almost melts the air. And in that moment, you understand why thunder matters. It isn't just weather, it's recognition. Proof that something beyond this cold remembers you exist. The fire hisses again as another cup of honey beer is poured. The smoke climbs straight and steady, carrying words older than reason. Gratitude, longing, survival. You look at your hands, still warm from the flames, still trembling slightly from the sound. For a moment, you can almost feel the pulse of the buried season, slow but steady, breathing somewhere beneath the snow. The sun dips low, dragging its reflection across the frozen river like a brushstroke of gold on glass. The drumming fades, the voices quiet, and the smoke drifts away toward wherever gods keep their correspondence. No one speaks now. There's no need. The village returns to its rhythm, slow, practical, reverent. But everything feels different. The walls seem softer, the air less cruel. Even the cold, that old tyrant, has lost a little of its authority. You close the door behind you and sit by the fire. The coals glow red, not the red of blood or danger, but of promise. Outside, the snow shifts faintly, as if turning over in its sleep. You think of the story again of thunder under ice, of gods who dream in the dark, and you whisper, half to yourself, half to the season that still waits below the frozen soil. Summer slept beneath the ice, but it still breathed. The next morning begins with the smell of smoke and bread, a combination so comforting it almost feels illegal after so many months of bland air. The thunder has moved on, but its echo lingers in the village, like a rumor everyone enjoys repeating. People keep glancing at the horizon, half expecting the sky to wink back. You step outside, and the frost on the threshold fractures under your heel with a crisp sigh. The wind no longer bites, it nibbles. The difference is small, but here, small is a form of salvation. Someone has already stoked the great hearth in the square. Thin blue smoke curls upward, drawing lines between the villagers and the clouds. Children chase it as if it were a pet. A woman laughs, and the sound rings too brightly against the whiteness, a sudden reminder that warmth can be noisy. Today is for tending the fire. Not any fire, the fire. The one that represents Perkūnas' ear, his doorway, his memory of the living. You can neglect many things in winter laundry, optimism, your own toenails, but never this flame. You join the others gathering peat, the earthy bricks stacked like brown bread. They smell of old rain and patient rot. Someone cracks a joke about how peat and people share the same ingredients, just with different cooking times. It gets a few laughs, the kind that release more heat than humor. When you toss the first block onto the coals, the fire swallows it with a hiss and a shiver, a sound halfway between appetite and approval. You imagine the god hearing it, stretching in his sub-zero cave. The elders begin their preparations for the calling ritual. You have seen it every year, but you watch as if it were the first. Each motion is deliberate, practical, beautiful, unnecessary in the way all sacred things are. One old woman grinds resin with the butt of a spoon. The smell bursts open, sharp, green, medicinal, the scent of pine teaching itself to hope. Another braids dried grasses into tight little rings to feed the flame slowly. A man polishes a bronze cup with the hem of his coat until it shines like a tame sundae. It will hold the first offering of the season's honey beer. The children line up again with their charcoal lightning marks. Now they draw circles around the door frames, closing yesterday's zigzags into a complete spell. Each child hums while working, inventing lyrics as they go. Thunder, don't knock too loud. We're small, and the soup is thin. A mother pretends to scold, but hums along anyway. You help them smear a little soot on their cheeks, tradition says. It confuses evil spirits, who are notoriously bad at facial recognition. They squeal at the cold touch, then beam as if already braver. The old priestess, not really a priestess, just the oldest person with the best memory, raises her stick. The noise stills. Even the fire seems to listen. She begins to chant in the old language, words so ancient that even understanding bows its head. Her voice trembles but never falters. It moves like smoke, fragile, insistent, impossible to hold. You don't need to know the translation. You feel it. It's the grammar of endurance speaking to itself. Others join, each voice entering like another log laid carefully onto the fire. Soon the chant becomes a rhythm, a slow heartbeat you can tap your foot to without shame. Someone beats the drum, low and patient, and the sound travels up the chimney into the white sky, where maybe it will find the god's ear and remind him that this corner of the world is still working. When the chant ends, the offering of beer begins. Honey beer is a kind of devotion you can drink, which makes it the most successful religion ever invented. Each household brings a small jug. No one drinks until the god has been served. You take your turn. The cup is heavy, embossed with tiny lightning bolts, Perkūnas, the smiths call them. You pour carefully so the foam doesn't embarrass itself. The liquid hits the flame and flares pale gold. A quick, brilliant gasp of summer's ghost. The crowd sighs as one body. If light could blush, it would look like that. Afterward, you are permitted to sip yourself. It tastes of warmth, pretending to be sweetness of honey filtered through smoke, of patience dissolved in barley. Someone jokes that the gods invented alcohol so mortals would forget how cold eternity is. Someone else crosses themselves just in case that's true. By afternoon, the sky has grown theatrical again, pale above, bruised at the edges. The air smells of sap and faith. A handful of men climb the hill behind the village, carrying torches, their figures flickering against the snow like words written on parchment too close to the fire. You follow. At the top stands a wooden pole carved with spiral grooves and crowned by a weather-darkened disc. It's called the bolt post, the village's makeshift temple. No roof, no icons, just wood, sky, and courage. When thunder comes, the people say, "This post hums like a struck string." You have never heard it yourself, but the idea is enough. The torches are planted in a circle around it. The flames lean east, bowing to the wind. You all stand quietly, waiting for the next sound from the heavens. It doesn't come, but in its absence, you hear other things. The trickle of meltwater somewhere deep in the snowpack, the crackle of resin catching in a torch, the small, delighted gasp of a child who has just realized the sun feels different today. You smile. The god answers in his own time. Maybe thunder is already speaking, just in a dialect of silence. Evening slips in, blue and deliberate. The ritual fire is carried home in small clay lamps, one for each house, each soul. The villagers cradle them like infants, guarding every flicker from the wind. Lose the flame, they say, and you'll have to borrow light from your neighbor, which is humbling, or from the church in the next valley, which is scandalous. At your door, you pause. The charcoal circle drawn by the children glows faintly in the lamplight. You breathe on the flame once gently, the way you'd greet an old friend. Then you place the lamp beside the hearth and feed it a thin splinter of pine. The fire wakes, yawns, and accepts the company. Soon the room smells of incense, beer, bread, and people. The combination could convince even a skeptic that paradise might be domestic. Someone knocks Tomas, naturally holding a tray of still warm fire cakes. He grins. "For the god," he says, "and for whoever happens to be guarding him." You let him in. The two of you eat in companionable silence. The cakes are sweet and sticky, and bits of ash crunch between your teeth like punctuation. Tomas raises his cup. "To the trapped summer," he says. You clink. "May it find the key." Outside, the wind laughs a sound halfway between approval and envy. Later, when the lamp has burned down to a quiet orange sigh, you sit alone by the hearth. The flame dances in slow grammar question. Pause. Answer. You think of how this ritual has survived empires, crusades, calendars, how people keep lighting fires for gods who may no longer have addresses, and how somehow the act still works, even when the theology falls asleep. The door shifts, letting in a narrow draft. You don't bother closing it. You like the way cold and warmth negotiate at the threshold, neither quite winning. Maybe faith is exactly that, a conversation that never needs resolution. You whisper the word again, softly enough that only the smoke hears it. Perkūnas. Somewhere, deep below the ice, thunder rolls, once not loud, just present, like a memory turning over. The sound moves through the floorboards, through your ribs, through the breath you didn't realize you were holding. The lamp flame leans toward the noise, curious. You smile. "Good night." You tell it. "Take your time, M." The room settles. Outside, The frost resumes its slow, patient work, knitting the world together while the god dreams. Inside, your fire keeps its vigil, the small, unwavering heartbeat of belief. You have learned that belief is heavier when it can be held. Words are warm, but metal keeps its promise through the night. So, after the first thunder, the village turns toward the forge, or what serves as one in weather that refuses to bend anything but backs. The blacksmith's hut has not sung for weeks. Iron hates the cold's arrogance, but bronze, if flattered with enough fire and patience, will remember how to flow. You arrive to find the smith coaxing coals like a difficult uncle. He feeds the hearth with pine and a stubborn rhythm, then leans in and blows until his breath becomes an argument the fire can't win. The room smells of charcoal and old rain hidden in wood. On the bench, a clutch of clay molds, their insides scratched with the zigzags of lightning, the stubbled curve of a hammerhead no larger than a thumbnail. Perkūnas made small enough to fit under a shirt, close enough to overhear a heartbeat. Protection, the smith says, not looking up. Then he grins. Also jewelry. The gods are practical. You know how these things are born. First comes the idea. Carved in beeswax at the table by lamplight, a tiny bolt with teeth, a fat little hammer with a notch for a cord, a sun disk with rays sharp enough to argue with darkness. Fingers warm the wax and leave their prints behind, a human pattern trapped inside the future object, a signature the eye can't see. Then the wax sleeps inside clay, and the clay hardens, and the whole thing meets the kind of heat that changes names. The smith tips the crucible. Molten bronze slides like honey made of stars, seething, patient, inevitable. It vanishes into the mouths of the molds with a soft sound, not a hiss, not a sizzle, something more intimate, like soup telling a pot it approves. Outside, the wind lays its ear to the wall, curious. You wait. Waiting is the liturgy of winter. When the molds have cooled, he breaks them gently as bread. Little shapes tumble into the world, still dull, still shy, but unmistakable. Lightning captured mid-strike, hammers caught mid-swing. He drops them into a bucket. The water gasps, then forgives. Steam writes a quick letter to the rafters and disappears unread. One by one, the smith files the flash from their edges, stones the faces smooth, polishes them with ash and a rag until they wake to their own reflection. A girl strings one onto a strip of leather and holds it up to the light. The charm answers with a quick, bright wink, as if remembering what it was before it learned to be metal. Will it keep wolves away? Someone asks. Only if you show it to them and explain theology very clearly, the smith says. Laughter warms the room. Even the metal seems pleased. Not everyone wants a bolt. Old folks prefer the hammer not because it is stronger, but because it suggests labor. The god is craftsman, shaping weather into mercy. Young people wear both, greedy for luck. They need all the arguments they can get. For babies, there are sun discs, no bigger than a poppy seed, sewn into the seam of a cap so that light can find their fontanelle. For doorways, rings stamped with little storms, hung where drafts like to gossip. For boats, thin plaques scratched with zigzags, nailed to the prow so the river knows you have friends in the sky. You thread a small hammer on a thong and feel its weight against your sternum, not heavy, exactly, but definite. It sits there like a word you haven't said yet, a syllable waiting for the right sentence. When you breathe, it taps once, a private punctuation mark. You imagine Perkūnas reading your ribcage like a line of text. Present, present, present. There is a drawer in your house where older amulets sleep. Green with patina, edges blunted by decades of decisions, they look like coins spent wisely. Some belonged to your grandmother. Others were found when a field sulked and gave up its old secrets after rain. You lay the new charm among the elders. They do not speak, but the silence shifts, approving. The village is full of superstitions that have learned how to be useful. If an amulet turns black overnight, the wearer has taken on someone else's misfortune. Give them soup. If the amulet snaps where the cord passes through, do not mend it. Bury it beneath the doorway so it can practice guarding without interruption. If a lightning charm is found in the ash after a house fire, plant it at the garden's corner and your beans will never sulk again. You smile at the logic. Faith is a better farmer than fear. Tomas insists that the only amulet that ever failed him was the one he forgot to wear. You point out that all amulets fail when left on the table. He glares, then agrees. So, an experiment that proves itself. You concede the point. You both wear your charms a little tighter that day, purely to satisfy science. Children, of course, test the gods. They swing their pendants and count how many times the hammer hits their ribs before it stops. An odd number means good luck. An even number means you should go home and peel potatoes to ward off boredom. They tap their bolts against the bolt post on the hill, ears tilted to hear whether the wood hums in sympathy. Sometimes it does, because wind is a conspirator. This counts as a miracle and is recorded carefully in the archives of gossip. Late in the afternoon, the smith lays out a row of finished pieces on a board by the door. Sunlight, pale but earnest, runs its fingers across the bronze, and the room glows as if the summer had sneaked in wearing a winter coat. People step in and out, trading a coin here, a promise there, a loaf, a handful of flax, a story worth at least a buckle. No one haggles. You don't bargain with the weather, or with those who tame it into pocket-sized courage. A woman comes for a charm to hang above her cow's stall. Not for milk, she says, for manners. The smith gives her a hammer with a soft edge. This one persuades. It doesn't argue. She leaves, looking relieved on behalf of the cow. A boy buys a bolt for his brother at sea. He rubs it on his sleeve until it shines like impatience. Do you think it will keep him from storms? He asks. It will keep him from forgetting that someone waits, you say. He nods. That is better than safety. An old man trades a story for a charm. He says that when he was a child, the plow turned up a stone axe in his father's field, a black, smooth thing shaped almost like a fish, with a hole that begged for a cord. Grandfather called it a thunderstone, convinced that lightning had flung it from heaven in a previous century. They tied it above the door, and no one in that house was ever struck by anything sharper than a joke. You know now the axe was older than your gods and your language put together, but the story still works. Some objects are so ancient they agree to be whatever you need. At home, you set a little altar on the shelf, a flat stone from the river, your new hammer, a pinch of salt, a crust of bread leaning against the salt like a pilgrim resting against a milestone. Not grand, not solemn tidy. You light a splint and touch it to a twist of resin. The smoke rises with a polite curl, privately convinced of its own holiness. You sit and watch the charm catch light and return it, gold echoing gold, as if rehearsing the grammar of sunshine. The house seems to listen. Gabija approves. The hearth settles its coals like a cat agreeing with everything. Even the draft at the door behaves, deciding that argument would be undignified. You take the charm down, hold it a moment in your palm until your skin warms the metal, then hang it back up so it can remember a body's temperature long after the body sleeps. A thought occurs to you not profound, but stubborn. Perhaps amulets are practice. Small rehearsals for greeting the larger powers when they visit. If you can learn to treat a thumb-sized bolt with courtesy, you won't panic when the sky throws its full-sized version across the valley. You put the charm under your shirt. Against your chest, it grows briefly hot with borrowed fire, then settles to a steady presence. Your breath lifts it, lowers it, gives it a task it seems to enjoy. Stay. That night, the village speaks in a softer register. People go about their errands with the mysterious confidence of those who have remembered where they keep their courage. Doorways glint as if they've learned a new word. A baby sleeps with one hand closed around a tiny ring and dreams the easily flatterable dreams of the newly protected. The bolt post on the hill occupies the horizon like a sentence that has decided not to end yet. You lie by your own hearth, the amulet pressed between bone and blanket, and listen to the house read its nightly psalm creak, hush, sigh, ember, pause. The charm picks up the rhythm and adds a tick of its own, not loud enough to hear, only present enough to feel. You never intended to believe in objects. Objects believed in you first, and now you are simply returning the favor. Remembering the old man's thunderstone, you picture the archaeologists of the future shifting through your ashes, turning up amulets like coins from a country that refused to retire its currency. They will give them numbers and footnotes. They will write, bronze pendant in the form of a lightning bolt, domestic cult of a sky god, household protection. None of their careful lines will mention how this one, right now, steadies a single person through a single night. But you will know. The living margin is not for the catalog. Outside, a wind change swings through the pines and leaves them speaking in a friendlier grammar. The river booms once under its lid, as if clearing its throat before a speech it hasn't been allowed to give for months. A far rumble answers not the command of a storm yet, only the reconsideration of one. You smile into the furry dark and tap the little hammer twice, a private code. I hear you. I'm here. The house approves. The hearth glows. In the quiet that follows, the amulet cools to the exact temperature of your skin, indistinguishable, which is the point. You turn onto your side and wish the room the kind of luck that doesn't need witnesses. The charm shifts and settles its small head against your heart, like a guest who knows the house rules and plans to keep them. Somewhere under the snow, the trapped summer flexes its fingers, counting its tools: thunder, lightning, memory, metal. It has learned patience from rivers and humor, from people who refuse to be frightened properly. Tomorrow, the rituals will wear simpler clothes. The songs will be hums again. Work will reclaim the hours. But the little hammers will keep time. The little bolts will keep their edge. And the doorways, ringed in soot and courage, will continue to make introductions between cold and warmth without letting either one get away with rudeness. You let sleep come, not as an escape, but as a continuation. Faith, you realize, is not a peak. It's a habit polished by hands until it shines even on cloudy days. The thunder can take its time. You are ready to answer, whether it speaks in sky, in fire, or in the small grammar of bronze. Soon the season will remember its breath. You wake before the light again, but something has shifted. The air feels looser in your lungs, less like glass, more like silk left on a windowsill. Through the crack in the shutter, dawn is not gray but a diluted amber, as if the sun has been testing its brush after a long hibernation. The fire in the hearth has died down to 2 red thoughts and a memory. Yet the room isn't cruelly cold. You breathe and smell damp earth under the smoke, a scent that doesn't belong to winter. Something underneath the season has started moving. The village rises quietly, every door opening to the same idea. The world has exhaled. People stand in thresholds, sleeves pushed up as though the sky itself might need assistance. Someone says, "The god turned in his sleep," and everyone nods. A metaphor, but also logistics if Perkūnas rolls over. The snow begins to sweat. By noon, water threads its way through the drifts. Narrow rivulets whispering scandal. You crouch and watch them run, surprised by their competence. Ice breaks with the sound of old parchment, and the first reflections of sunlight ripple like laughter, testing its range after a long silence. The elders call this day the breathing of summer. Not a holiday. Holidays imply certainty, but a recognition, the way you'd greet a stranger who looks uncannily like someone you once loved. They say each thawed patch of ground is a lung, and when the last one draws air, the season will change its name. That afternoon, the people gather near the river's mouth, where the ice has cracked wide enough to glimpse motion. The water moves like muscle under skin. Someone tosses a sprig of pine onto it. Another adds a crumb of bread, then honey, then one of the tiny bronze hammers. The charm flashes once and disappears into the dark, a spark returning to its teacher. You add nothing. You simply kneel and listen. The river makes a low sound, not a roar or a murmur, but something in between, a syllable too broad for a single meaning. Perhaps it is practicing the thunder's accent. Perhaps it's only the ice remembering how to be rain. Behind you, Tomas clears his throat. Do you think he'll wake fully this year? You shrug. If I were a god, I'd take my time. He grins. If you were a god, you'd never stop talking. Ah, exactly, you say. That's why I'm not one. The laughter feels larger than the joke, a muscle stretching after disuse. Toward evening, smoke begins to rise from every chimney at once, thin, content plumes spelling the same word in different handwriting. The smell of peat and bread and confidence mingles with the cool scent of meltwater. Inside each house, someone tends a small fire with the distracted affection reserved for old friends. Even the dogs nap facing the doors now, noses toward the thaw, as if expecting guests. You sit by your own hearth and unstring the Perkūnas from your neck. It leaves a small, warm circle against your skin, a reminder that belief leaves marks even when it behaves itself. You hold it in your palm and notice the way its edges have dulled bronze, learning patience from flesh. The charm is no longer just a symbol. It has become a conversation piece between you and time, a proof that endurance can be beautiful if polished by enough breathing. Outside, The first rain in months arrives shyly. Not a downpour, just a slow tapping, as if the sky is asking whether you're still awake. You open the door and let the drops find you. They're softer than snow, less certain, but they land and stay, and that alone feels like generosity. Each one strikes the roof, the river, the trees, the frozen fields, and each tiny impact is an echo of thunder's larger grammar. The world is repeating a lesson aloud. Warmth begins in sound. For a moment, you imagine the god beneath the ice, his hammer resting on his knee, listening to his own distant voice. He smiles, of course he does, and somewhere inside the frozen heart of the earth, something unclenches. The next roll of thunder is faint but affectionate, like a giant clearing his throat before telling another story. You whisper the word back, Perkūnas, not as worship, just as recognition. And the echo fades, satisfied. Night drifts down. The air smells of wet soil and possibility. The last snow on the roof slips free with a long sigh. Inside, your fire burns small but steady, painting everything with the color of recollection. You think of the rituals, the smoke, the bronze, the songs sung against silence. How all of it was less about begging the season to change than reminding yourselves that change was allowed. Faith, you realize, was never meant to conquer the cold. It was designed to outlast it. The room hums softly, the sound of wood, metal, and heart negotiating a truce with time. You stretch your hand toward the open window, feel the cool, damp air touch your skin, and it feels like the world saying thank you for waiting. The god doesn't answer in words this time. He answers in weather. A slow, measured rain that sounds exactly like forgiveness. You close your eyes, and for the first time in months, the silence around you isn't empty, it's full. Full of dripping roofs, melting snow, sleepy thunder, and the quiet satisfaction of a world remembering how to breathe. And as you drift towards sleep, you whisper the old line once more, not as a plea, but as a promise. Summer slept beneath the ice, but it still breathed. You've heard the story 100 times, but tonight it feels different. Perhaps it's the air heavy, watchful, full of the kind of silence that arrives before a question finds its answer. Or maybe it's because the thunder now sounds less like noise and more like memory remembering itself. The fire crackles low. Outside, the snow drips steadily from the eaves, small, rhythmic heartbeats in the dark. Someone begins the tale in that quiet way the Balts always do, not as if inventing, but as if translating something that has been whispering through the earth since before words were born. Long before your ancestors had roofs to defend or fields to bargain with, the world was divided not by maps but by temperament. The sky was alive with purpose, the earth with appetite. Between them lay all that could shiver, bloom, or die. Perkūnas, they say, was the first voice to echo in the sky, a being made of movement and moral clarity. His body was the weather, his temper the horizon. When he breathed, winds rushed to arrange themselves. When he blinked, lightning learned geometry. He was not merciful, but he was fair. And that, to the old Balts, was the kindest thing a god could be. Then came Velnias, the serpent, the wanderer beneath roots and stones, a god of shadow, of clever hands and slippery promises. He loved the damp places where seeds hid before courage found them. He was charming, in the way danger often is. He called himself the keeper of secrets. Others called him the thief of fire. In those first seasons, the world was warm and naive. Fire lived in the open, its laughter echoing through forests. It belonged to no one, and therefore to everyone. Children of the first humans learned to feed it with bark, and it rewarded them with light, with song, with roasted fish that didn't bite back. But Velnias grew envious. He wanted the warmth for himself, not because he was cold, but because the power to withhold is sweeter than the power to share. So one twilight, when the wind was lazy and Perkūnas was elsewhere, Velnias crept from his cave, a ribbon of black smoke in a world still learning the concept of betrayal. He found the fire sleeping, its embers curled like cats in the hollow of a tree. He whispered to it, promised it new adventures, and before dawn, he had hidden it deep beneath the earth. There, wrapped in damp soil and greed, the flame gasped, not dying, just waiting. When the sun rose, the world shivered. The trees grew pale. The rivers froze from the outside in. The people stumbled from their huts, staring at their cold hearths, confused by a silence that used to hum. They looked to the sky, and the sky darkened. Perkūnas awoke. His rage was not like human rage. It was systemic thunder, wind, the rearrangement of clouds into armies. He roared, and the air folded in half. He searched the forests, the mountains, the rivers. He demanded to know who had stolen the warmth that made the world a place instead of an accident. Velnias answered only with echoes, the sound of laughter filtered through stone. He slithered from root to root, clever and uncatchable. He changed shape, now a man, now a wolf, now a flicker in the corner of the eye. Everywhere Perkūnas struck, Velnias wasn't, but everywhere Velnias passed, the soil trembled and the air chilled. The gods, like men, learn patience through failure. Perkūnas understood that to catch the serpent, he would have to follow him into his element, the low places, the dark, the tunnels of the world. So he forged a weapon from the bones of storms, the thunder axe, bright as morning, heavy with consequence. He raised it high, and the clouds shuddered, recognizing their master. When he hurled it, the sky broke. Lightning sliced through the horizon, a wound, a verdict, a declaration that warmth would not vanish without protest. Each strike illuminated the ground just long enough for humans to glimpse the truth. Light fights, too. The storytellers say, this is how weather learned to speak. Every bolt is an accusation. Every rumble is a reply. The duel never ended. It became the heartbeat of the seasons. When thunder cracked across the winter sky, the old bolts believed they were hearing summer fighting its way home. The sound was both terrifying and tender, the same way hope feels when it first returns after too long away. Children covered their ears, but their mothers smiled. "Don't be afraid," they'd whisper. "It's only the god reminding the dark that it's rented space." The people didn't think of the storm as chaos. They saw conversation. Thunder and serpent speaking in code. A hiss below, an answer above. A flash here, a retreat there. Some nights, the duel lasted for hours, and the world glowed silver with their debate. When the rain came afterwards, soft, warm, persistent, the people bowed their heads. They said it was not water but forgiveness falling from the sky. Each drop was a piece of the god's fury, cooled into mercy. The fields drank it greedily. Seeds that had been patient too long split with relief. Grass rose where snow had ruled. The rivers sang louder. And the villagers knew the hunt was still on, and the world was being repaired one storm at a time. As you listen to this story by your fire, you realize how well it fits the rhythm of human life. Every generation has its thief of fire, hunger, despair, forgetting, and every generation has its thunder, chasing, correcting, refusing to give up the warmth. The duel lives inside the chest as much as in the clouds. When your heart pounds in anger or in love, it is only a smaller version of Perkūnas throwing his axe again. There's comfort in that symmetry. The world's battles echo your own, but on a grander scale, as if the gods are practicing the emotions you haven't yet learned to name. You glance toward the door. Outside, the rain continues, soft and loyal. It patters on the roof like the steady breathing of something enormous and alive. Maybe the serpent is still writhing. Maybe the god is still swinging, but what matters is that they haven't stopped. That's the promise, isn't it? That the struggle continues. And because it continues, life continues too. You take another sip of the now cool honey beer. It tastes like stormlight pretending to be sweetness. In the flicker of the coals, you see shapes: a hammer descending, a tail coiling, a serpent's smile. You blink, and they're gone, leaving only warmth behind. And outside, far away, thunder rolls again, not as anger this time, but as applause. You wake to the sound of rain arranging itself along the roof in tidy lines, like script the sky has practiced for centuries. The coals in the hearth are the color of patient cherries. You nudge them and they answer, obliging as old friends. Somewhere beyond the wall, a raven clears its throat and delivers a complaint on behalf of weather. You smile. Everything is speaking today. The storm that argued all night has changed its tone. No more pronouncements, only follow-through. Perkūnas has thrown his axe enough. Now the edges soften into water. It falls steadily, untheatrically, as if the god has decided that mercy works best at a walking pace. You open the door and step under the eaves. The world smells of iron and earth, a scent with memories in it. Horses, warm bread, wet wool. The first day you knew the river's name. The snow shrinks without complaint. From the fields, a dark color rises soil, returning like a prodigal, shy but sincere. This is the part of the myth people often forget. The purpose of thunder is rain, and the purpose of rain is food. The duel in the sky is epic. The result is ordinary. That is the holiness of it. You watch the thatch shed droplets in even ranks. Each bead falls to join others. Each joins the river. The river answers by waking its edges and shaking a little dream from its stones. The reeds perform their thin music. Less haunted now, more conversational. If there is a word for this mood, it might be returning. Inside, you tie on your little hammer, a light weight against your chest, like a punctuation mark reminding the sentence to keep going. You ladle porridge and share it with whoever happens to be within arm's length of your spoon. Breakfast, like thunder, invites witnesses. By mid-morning, the village is ankle-deep in proof. Children stomp puddles as if baptizing themselves into the season. Dogs investigate every rivulet with a scholar's gravity. Someone stands in the lane with a palm held out, measuring the god's generosity by the spoonful. No one complains about damp wood. Soaked wood is a future fire. Patience is a kindling that never runs out. You walk to the fields with the others. The ground gives a little under your boots, a courtesy that feels intimate after months of iron. Old men kneel and press their hands to the soil, as if asking a question they have no right to ask. The soil replies by smelling alive. Here is the theology the bolts trusted. Thunder is the argument. Rain is the answer. Grain is the amen. The whole creed fits in a single loaf. A woman draws a line in the soft dirt with her finger, marking the first row that will be sown when the frost finally signs its resignation. She hums the thunder melody under her breath, just the skeleton of it, and the ground seems to recognize the tune. You can almost feel seeds flexing in their sleep, the way a hand opens a little when its dream turns generous. Someone brings a jug. It's not a ritual, not formally, but it becomes one the moment a circle forms. You pass the honey beer and pour a small measure onto the field's edge. The earth drinks. A shy foam gathers and then vanishes, summer practicing. Tomas, who never met a theory he didn't argue with, and also Mary, points to the lowest clouds drifting gray over the ridge. See how they empty themselves politely, moving as they give? That's a sermon. You ask who preached it. Perkūnas, he says, with an editor. You don't ask the editor's name. You suspect it is rain. Afternoon folds the light into gentler cloth. The storm recedes into a distant rumble, a conversation moving to another room so you can work. You stay a while longer in the fields, doing nothing useful, which is sometimes the most useful posture. A crow hops between furrows and leaves black calligraphy where your eyes needed ink. Back by the river, the ice is no longer a lid but a rim. Water slips its boundary with a conspirator's grin, and you hear the old winter grammar lose cases it once enforced. Where the current meets the shore, clear fingers pull at last year's grass. It looks like breathing, because it is. You kneel and cup a handful of river to your ear, an old superstition disguised as curiosity. It sounds like a distant marketplace. Bargaining, laughter, the clink of cups, someone praising pears that haven't grown yet. You know there will be blithesome years and hail on the one afternoon that could break you. You know the serpent never leaves, it only changes masks. Still you drink. The cold climbs your throat and turns into brightness behind your eyes. By evening, the village windows glow. Not the desperate gold of siege night, something calmer. Within each house, tasks resume their human scale. Mending, that means tomorrow. Stories that don't need to defend themselves with miracles. You slice bread. It steams the smallest cloud. Even the crumb seems improved by thunder. Someone knocks. A neighbor steps in with a basket of onions cured on rafters and forgotten by worry. I traded for these last autumn, she says, and then I hoarded them because fear has a pantry. Help me correct that. You laugh and peel one. The sting feels like honestly earned tears. Between you, the table becomes sensible. Bread, onion, a dish of salt, a cup, and the sound of rain making more of everything. Later, the elders gather in the square not to summon, but to remember. They explain the myth with a cartographer's clarity for the benefit of a child who wants to know where gods live when they are not being weather. Perkūnas lives wherever light needs a backbone, one says. And Velnias lives wherever warmth is taken hostage, says another. The child frowns in the approved way of philosophers. But why keep fighting if nobody wins? You watch the elders' faces soften into the sort of smile that outlives wars. Because while they fight, the oldest says, "We eat." You walk home through a lane that has learned how to be mud again. The smell rises, and the night warms a fraction small arithmetic that matters. The bolt post on the hill is a dark exclamation at the edge of the sky. And for once the sentence around it sounds less like command and more like lullaby. Inside, you bank the fire and lay out tomorrow's tools. The good knife, the needle that obeys, the length of twine that refuses to be anything but useful. You polish your little hammer with the corner of your sleeve, not from superstition, but from manners. It has done its job. It deserves to shine. The house sings its old psalm: rafter, latch, ember, breath. You listen for the faint roll beyond the ridge, and when it comes distant, rounded, sure, you answer without words. A nod, a held breath released, a hand flat on the table to feel the grain answer softly, like a drum too modest to brag. This is the part of faith that doesn't make speeches. It stands quietly in a doorway and lets the season pass through, holding the door with its hip so the hinges won't ache. It stacks wood with a tenderness usually reserved for babies. It teaches soup to forgive thinness. It calls neighbors by their names until names sound like full pockets. The myth, told properly, does not end with a victory. It ends with provisions. Rain for the seed, heat for the bread, stories for the long parts between. Outside, the last tatters of the storm scribble their signatures across the north. A single bright line divides cloud from cloud, Perkūnas signing his work without gloating. No one claps. The field will applaud in grain. Just before sleep, you open the door and lean against the frame. The air is cooler now, clean as a new cup. From a far stand of fir, an owl asks the proper question: who goes there? Only us, you think, the human plural that makes winter bearable. We go there. We stay. We plant. We wait. When thunder cracked in winter, they believed summer was fighting its way home. Tonight, you believe it too, not because you need a spectacle, but because the logic is beautiful and the bread is real. You set the little hammer on the shelf beside the hearthstone and let it eavesdrop on the coal's happy whisper. Faith as resistance, thunder as promise, rain as the proof that promises can be eaten. You lie down, and the room lights one more memory behind your eyes. A bright axe falling, a dark coil loosening, a field lifting its first green vowels to pronounce the coming season. The storm moves on, generous and unhurried. Sleep arrives with muddy boots and a kind expression. And somewhere beneath the quiet, the kind you trust, the trap summer turns over, finds its breath, and keeps breathing. Even before the dawn learns how to behave, the hearth is awake. Its glow hums softly behind the shutters, painting the ceiling with gold that has no source but loyalty. You move quietly, adding peat, coaxing the embers into speech. The air changes as you do, warmer, less suspicious. They say Gabija watches this. Sister of Perkūnas, daughter of the first flame, keeper of all domestic miracles. If thunder is the sky's heartbeat, Gabija is its breath once it comes indoors. Every family calls her Our Lady of Warmth, the quiet goddess, the one who listens even when no one speaks. You bow, as your mother did, as her mother did before the Romans learned how to write names in stone. It's not ceremony, it's muscle memory. The gesture is older than religion. The body remembering how to say thank you to something that keeps it alive. A pinch of salt, a murmur, the smallest nod toward the flame, the daily negotiation between mortality and mercy. The hearth sighs and answers, the way cats do when they've been flattered correctly. Its light stretches across the floorboards, pulling the color back into things the cold had tried to erase: the rug, the wooden spoon, the bowl left unwashed, because reverence always outranks hygiene. Children wake to this light. They tumble from the loft wrapped in wool, faces soft with sleep. The youngest reaches toward the flame, stops just short, then laughs as if he's learned something important about restraint. Your eldest stirs the porridge while humming a tune about the sun's return, not quite in key, but close enough for the gods of early morning. Outside, the wind rehearses another speech against the shutters. It howls in long vowels, like a prophet nobody invited. Inside, no one listens. You have Gabiha now, and she prefers diplomacy to drama. Each home in the village keeps her alive in its own way. Some guard a single ember in a clay bowl through the night. Others leave bread on the mantelpiece, so the goddess won't grow hungry while watching. No one, not even a fool, lets the hearth die out entirely. To extinguish it would be an offense, a kind of domestic blasphemy. They tell of one man who let his fire go dark to save Pete. By morning, his cow had wandered into the snow and been found frozen mid-step, eyes wide with regret. No one spoke of it afterward, except when teaching children why thrift has limits. So you tend the flame carefully, never allowing it to sulk. When you leave the house, you whisper, "Stay, Gabiha. Guard the walls. Don't let mischief in." When you return, you greet her first, before kin or dog. You bow slightly, as though passing royalty in a corridor too narrow for ceremony. If the flame sputters, you offer a breath, gentle as apology. If it grows too eager, you remind it softly that warmth, like anger, works best in moderation. And always, before sleep, you feed it one last stick and say goodnight. The fire does not answer in words. It answers in survival. When the storm season begins and Perkūnas fills the sky with his iron language, you imagine Gabiha listening. Brother above, sister below, thunder's echo turned into comfort. The gods keep their distance now. The church taught them to live in metaphors. But the old pacts persist quietly in kitchens, where theology boils down to whether the soup will last until Friday. Elders claim that every spark carries a little memory of the first world, when warmth and will were the same thing. They say Gabija's flame is not borrowed from heaven, but from the beginning, a remnant of creation's first breath. That's why it must never die, because if every hearth in every house went cold at once, the world would lose its place in the story. The dark would forget how to stop. You don't know if it's true, but you keep the fire anyway. Belief, you've learned, doesn't need proof, only participation. The children gather close as the day leans toward evening. Wool blankets, crackling logs, the faint perfume of dried juniper. Someone tells a story about the time thunder and fire danced in the same room, and the walls survived out of sheer admiration. Laughter fills the air, quick and honest. For a moment, winter doesn't matter. Gabija watches from the coals, patient, luminous, unsurprised. She's seen centuries come and go, Kingdoms rise and rot. Gods traded like livestock between faiths. Yet her worship remains the same. A meal cooked, a prayer whispered, a family unfreezing one breath at a time. Outside, frost draws its silver handwriting on the window. Inside, the fire answers with gold. And in that dialogue, cold declaring itself, warmth replying politely, the village survives another night. By nightfall, the wind sounds like a guest who's overstayed. It prowls around the house, fingering the shutters, testing the latch as though it might find a softer world inside. But the hearth is awake, and Gabija never sleeps when the cold is near. The flame holds the room steady, a single sentence of light spoken again and again, until even the dark learns its rhythm. You sit by it as the family gathers. The day has been long and the small winter way, everything measured, nothing wasted. Boots drip near the threshold. A scarf steams gently by the fire, a ghost shedding its shape. The children have turned the floor into geography. Islands of blanket, rivers of shadow, mountains of shoes. The old cat, impervious to mythology, curls like a comma by the logs, punctuating comfort. Outside, the forest hums its ancient chord of endurance, branches groaning, frost snapping, an owl reading names aloud to the snow. Inside, breath and fire weave together, warmth braided with belief. This is where the gods have learned to whisper instead of roar. Every evening follows a pattern that feels older than the house. Someone kneels by the hearth and smooths the ashes into order. Another sprinkles a little grain or salt onto the coals, the offering almost invisible, but sincerity never depended on size. A quiet phrase accompanies the gesture, a greeting, a promise, a confession that you've survived another day because something stayed lit. The words vary by family. Some say, "Sleep well, Gabija. Guard what we love." Others murmur, "Thank you for staying when the sun did not." Children prefer the shorter versions. "Don't go out. We'll be good." And always, there's that small shared moment when everyone looks at the same glow and feels the same unspoken truth. Warmth is a covenant. No one dares spit into the flame. No one crosses the room in anger when Gabija is watching. Even quarrels lower their voices here. If you must fight, you do it by the door, where the cold can mediate. When a guest arrives in winter, the first act of hospitality is not a greeting but a gesture toward the hearth. "Come warm your hands," you say, before asking names or news. It is the oldest form of diplomacy. Before words can heal, fingers must thaw. Visitors will sit and stretch their palms to the light, and conversation will bloom like frost melting off a branch. The goddess loves this. She has always been fond of reconciliation. It burns clean. Sometimes, when the snow grows fierce and travel turns cruel, a wanderer may knock long after midnight. The door opens, the stranger enters, and no one asks questions until their breath no longer smokes. The rule is sacred. Anyone may share the fire, because the fire belongs to everyone who remembers how to be human. In the morning, when they leave, they carry a little ember cupped in a clay shard light borrowed, not stolen. This is how villages stay connected in blizzard months, by the quiet traffic of shared flame, moving from hearth to hearth like a slow, glowing heartbeat. Each ember carries gossip, blessing, and the scent of someone else's soup. It is the kindest kind of contagion. On some nights, when the storm presses close, You imagine Gabiha walking the roof beams, her gown of sparks sweeping the rafters clean of worry. She's not a queen, more like an aunt who knows every family's faults but chooses to love them anyway. She scolds and creaks, forgives in warmth. The fire pops, that's her laughter. When the log collapses inward, she sighs, rearranging her posture, preparing another hour of vigilance. Elders say the goddess keeps a ledger no priest has seen, not of sins but of small mercies. The loaf shared, the door opened, the quarrel left unfinished, the silence held long enough for another's heart to slow. Each kindness becomes a spark in her care, each cruel act a pinch of ash. The balance decides whether next winter will arrive like a teacher or a judge. You like that idea. It gives moral weight to simple chores. When you stack wood neatly, you're writing prayers in bark. When you scrub soot from the stones, you're polishing gratitude. When you stir the pot and taste for salt, you're measuring faith in handfuls, not hymns. As the night deepens, the stories begin. They are not heroic. The heroes of this land are mostly weather-resistant farmers and stubborn grandmothers who can outlast a famine with wit alone. Someone tells of the year the river froze so suddenly that fish were caught mid-swim, their faces pressed against the ice like saints on glass. Someone else remembers the wolf that learned to knock before stealing bread. Laughter flickers around the room like candlelight passing from one smile to another. You notice how the stories all end the same way. With survival, with soup, with fire still burning. The old ones say that Gabija listens to these tales as if collecting them for her own mythology. Each retelling adds a small ember to her crown. When enough people forget, she dims. When enough remember, she brightens, and the winter retreats a little further. The children fall asleep one by one, their cheeks glazed with the shine of firelight. You pull a blanket higher, tuck in an errant foot, and listen to the slow orchestra of breathing. Outside, the wind plays its tired song, but the walls hold, the flame holds, and belief hums softly beneath every dream. Before you sleep, you feed the hearth one last time. The log catches quickly, as if recognizing its purpose. You whisper the same line you always do. Rest well, Gabija. Keep us whole. The room fills with that particular stillness that only follows gratitude. You stretch your hands toward the heat until they glow faintly, then pull them back and watch the shadows rearrange themselves into comfort. The fire dances in quiet confidence. Its light touches the beams, the table, the faces of the sleeping, the door. Outside, the stars blink uncertainly, as though jealous of the competition. You lie down. The last thing you hear before the dark takes you is the small, steady sigh of the hearth. It sounds almost human content, watchful, alive, and somewhere beyond the walls, in the indifferent vastness of winter, the night wind pauses, listens, and for just a breath seems to envy the warmth inside. The snow returned heavier than before, as if trying to erase its own footprints. You wake one morning to a world that looks clean but feels wrong, the kind of silence that follows a sentence you wish hadn't ended. The fires still burn, the bread still bakes, the thunder still rolls from time to time. But something in the rhythm has changed. You can't name it yet, but you will. History always supplies names, even when the heart does not ask for them. They came from the west, the Teutonic Knights, iron and scripture in equal measure. Their banners bore suns and swords. Their boots pressed prayers into the snow. They spoke of one God only, a God who disliked competition and preferred stone churches to wooden groves. They brought the cross a shape simple enough to conquer any alphabet, and they lifted it above frozen rivers like a signal to heaven that new tenants had arrived. The people watched from the edges of forests, from behind trees that had been their first cathedrals. They said little. They were good at silence. Silence is how you survive when gods are at war and mortals are the ground beneath them. The knights burned the temples first, those open circles of oak and stone where offerings had once smoked upward into polite weather. The flames climbed straight and tall, unashamed of irony. For a moment, it looked like Perkūnas himself had returned, all thunder and light. But this fire did not listen when the people prayed. It answered to other hands. The lightning charms went next. Bronze bolts, hammers, and sun discs melted down to coins stamped with unfamiliar faces. The old women wept, not for the metal, but for the memory that no longer had skin. They buried what they could in the soft places between roots, whispering, "Sleep, my friends. Someone will dig you up when the world remembers its manners." In place of Perkūnas, they were told to worship Saint Elijah, also fond of thunder. They were assured only better-mannered and more obedient to papal schedules. The sermon said it kindly. Your old god has been promoted, given a title, reassigned to respectable work. You can keep your storms, as long as you rename them. Some obeyed. Most pretended to. Faith, like fire, can change its shape to survive a wind. Still, when lightning split the sky, people forgot their lessons. They crossed themselves, yes, but their lips moved in the older language. When thunder growled across the roof, mothers hushed their children and whispered, "He hasn't abandoned us yet." The words slipped out like muscle memory, a reflex older than doctrine. It wasn't rebellion, just habit, and habit, in this country, is the most faithful form of prayer. The priests built churches where forests had once been thickest, hoping the sound of bells would drown out the memory of storms. But thunder doesn't negotiate with architecture. It rolled right over the spires, answering the crosses with its usual disdain. And in the cellars of those new churches, where the stones sweated and the candles burned low, even the clergy flinched when the heavens cracked. Everyone hears the old language in thunder. It's one of those truths no translation can erase. Generations passed. The knights grew fat, their sons bored, their churches cracked. But the people stayed small, patient, inventive in the art of quiet defiance. They baptized their babies by day and whispered the old prayers by night. They carved crosses with lightning-shaped arms. They gave saints the faces of their forgotten gods. And when no one watched, they fed a crumb of bread to the fire and said, "For you, Gabiha, keep us safe from both kinds of heaven." History calls it conversion, but the people knew better. It was camouflage. The same faith, wearing a different coat for winter. Now the centuries have worn themselves thin. The old songs survive as fragments, the way frost survives on the edge of a window at dawn. Scholars translate them in libraries. Children hum them without knowing their meaning. The gods have gone quiet, but they are not gone. They've simply learned to whisper through weather, to hide their footprints beneath the seasons. Sometimes, on a February night, Thunder stirs where it shouldn't. No clouds, no lightning. Just a low rumble threading through the cold. People glance up from their soup and say nothing. But the corner of every mouth lifts just slightly. A smile, private and ancient. Because they know that perhaps the thunder god sleeps. Perhaps summer has stopped struggling beneath the ice. But when lightning flashes across a winter sky, someone still looks up and smiles. The old woman in the last house of the last village still tends her hearth as her mother did. She calls the fire by name. She feeds it gently. When it crackles, she answers, "Yes, yes, I remember." Outside, snow falls without hurry. A sky-wide silence stitched with memory. The world has learned new prayers, new alphabets, new holidays, but the essence remains the same: small defiance against the long dark. A candle in a church or a coal in a hut, both are ways of saying, we will not go cold willingly. If you listen closely tonight, between the thunder and the stillness, you might hear it too. The soft language of endurance. The grammar of light arguing with shadow. Faith doesn't vanish. It hibernates. The gods never leave. They simply grow quieter until someone needs them again. And one day, when the snow cracks open and summer climbs through the gap like a long-forgotten melody, the thunder will wake. He'll stretch his great arms, blink at the sun, and wonder who kept the world alive while he dreamed. He'll find you by the fire, still whispering, still smiling, because faith doesn't die. It just sleeps like fire under snow. This was not only a story about thunder, it was a story about endurance, about the sound that refuses to vanish, even when the air grows too cold for echoes, about how people kept their faith burning when the world froze around them. The Baltic lands have always known the vocabulary of frost, words shaped by hunger, by silence, by long nights measured in breaths rather than hours. And yet, somehow, these same lands have taught the world a softer grammar, the art of surviving without bitterness. The way to build warmth not by fighting the cold, but by learning how to speak kindly to it. You can still picture it if you close your eyes. A wide white field, a black forest, a wooden house holding one small orange heart. Inside that heart sits a family, wrapped in wool and patience. A bowl of soup steams on the table. The wind scratches politely at the shutters, waiting for permission to haunt. No one answers. The fire hums the only hymn that matters, a slow, rhythmic breathing, half comfort, half prayer. The stories told in that room are not meant for victory. They are meant for continuity, the gentle, miraculous trick of being here again. The people knew that gods might come and go, that names could change, that temples could turn to ash. But what mattered most was the small, glowing certainty that every morning someone would coax flame from the ashes and whisper, "Still here, Ed." And that more than any creed or conquest is how civilizations endure. If you trace history backward, you will always find the same fire, passed from palm to palm, like a secret too precious for language. The Romans had their hearth goddess, Vesta. The Greeks had Hestia. The Balts had Gabiha. Every culture has her, that quiet keeper of domestic eternity, because somewhere in every winter, someone needed to believe that the gods still cared about kitchens. And perhaps they did. Perhaps divinity was never about thunder or miracles, but about the way light behaves when you need it most. Think of Perkūnas, that fierce god of the storm, how even he, for all his violence and noise, was loved not for his strength, but for his return, because every bolt, every roar, every bright fracture in the sky was proof that the silence could be broken, that the sky had not forgotten the ground, that warmth, though buried, still fought its way through. When thunder cracked in winter, they believed summer was fighting its way home. And they were right, not scientifically, but emotionally, which is sometimes the deeper kind of truth. Now, centuries later, the world has other names for weather. Lightning has equations. Thunder has decibels. But none of that stops a quiet heart from looking up at a storm and whispering, "I remember you." Because memory is another kind of worship. Not grand, not loud, but loyal. It keeps company with absence. It sits by the hearth long after everyone else has gone to bed. It listens for footsteps that may never return, and yet still leaves the door unlatched. That is how old faith survives. Not in defiance, but in courtesy. You can almost hear the echoes of it now. The rhythm of wooden spoons on clay bowls, the sigh of snow against the roof, the far, faint roll of thunder wandering the horizon like an old friend checking in. The people of the north did not ask their gods for much. They asked for continuity, not miracles. They wanted their bread to rise, their children to wake, their cows to remember the path home through the fog. They wanted the storm to sound like forgiveness. And on most nights, it did. If you walk through those forests today, the ones that swallowed the temples, you might find small clues in the undergrowth, a fragment of bronze shaped like a bolt, a circle of stones blackened by fire, a charm green with age, still clutching the shape of a hammer. Touch it, and it feels almost warm. The metal remembers, even when the mouths forget. Archaeologists call it superstition, but perhaps it's a kind of mercy, that the past leaves breadcrumbs for belief, so we don't lose our way entirely in the snow. Because faith, in its keenest form, is simply the refusal to abandon wonder. When the missionaries came with their crosses and Latin words, they thought they were burying the old gods. But gods are hard to bury in frozen ground. They only sleep. They wait. They shift shapes and find new homes, sometimes in songs, sometimes in lullabies, sometimes in the ordinary kindness of people who remember to feed the fire before bed. And if you listen on the right night, you can still hear them breathing through the walls. The thunder has softened now, aged into memory. Perkūnas no longer hurls his axe across the sky, but maybe he doesn't need to. The people learned his lesson. They learned that every act of warmth is a bolt thrown at the cold. Every kindness is lightning in human hands. So tonight, as you rest, you join a lineage older than nations, the slow, unbroken chain of those who kept light alive. You may not worship the same gods, but you practice the same devotion. You close the door gently. You tend the small glow of a lamp. You let warmth fill the room, and you call that peace. It always was. The fire you see is not just combustion. It is memory wearing a disguise of physics. It carries within it all the whispered thanks, all the half-spoken prayers, All the nights when humanity told the dark, not yet. You picture the villagers again, centuries away. The mother at the hearth, the children half asleep. The father carving a new handle for a spade he'll use when the ground softens. The dog sighing in his sleep, dreaming of scents buried deep under snow. Outside, the wind still prowls, but it no longer feels like an enemy. It feels like the world's slow-breathing, cold, vast, but rhythmic. And you realize that maybe the gods never demanded worship. Maybe they only wanted witnesses, to be seen, to be remembered, to be told, we still hear you, even when you are quiet. Somewhere far above, clouds move like continents, their bellies bruised with old lightning. The moon appears, half cautious, half curious, a coin dropped into endless water. Its light falls across snow, and the snow answers a pale shimmer, as if the world is reflecting itself just to feel alive. If you could step outside now, you would hear nothing but the faint crack of frost in the trees. And yet the silence wouldn't be empty. It would be crowded with ghosts, with stories, with centuries of faith still glowing beneath the ice. Because silence is not the absence of gods. It's the space they leave open for us to listen. You pull the blanket higher and feel its weight, warm and patient. Your heartbeat slows to match the rhythm of the wind. The air smells faintly of wood smoke and sleep. Somewhere, far away, thunder murmurs once, not a threat, just a reminder, a signature, a god saying, I'm still here. You smile into the dark. Because even if the gods have retired to myth, their habits remain in us. The way we guard a flame, the way we trust warmth more than words, the way we still look up when the sky speaks. Let the ice melt slowly in your dreams. Let the sound of wind become gentle, the kind that lifts the edge of a curtain and strokes your hand as if apologizing for the cold. Let the world around you fade into snow and breath and faraway thunder. Because tonight, you don't need history to stay awake. You need it to let you rest. Somewhere beneath the snow, the gods of warmth still whisper. They hum through the roots, through the walls, through the quiet pulse of your own blood. They tell you what they've always told humankind, that no winter is final, that no darkness is absolute, that fire sleeps, yes, but it always wakes. So close your eyes, breathe with the old rhythm. Let the frost on the window turn to silver dreams. And if, somewhere in the distance, the thunder stirs again, smile. It only means the world is remembering itself. Because faith doesn't die. It just sleeps, like fire beneath snow. And tonight, as you drift away, it dreams in you.